The Sector 47 9S Archives. Archive 237. The Washington Weekends. Former classification. Restricted. Current status. Declassified for historical review. There are assignments every young field observer hopes to avoid. The Sol system was one of them. Remote, politically insignificant, technologically primitive. The official projections estimated that humanity would require at least 3 more centuries before becoming relevant to interstellar affairs. Sector 47 9S was considered an ideal place to train inexperienced personnel. Complete paperwork, and if one was particularly unlucky, spend several decades documenting primitive radio broadcasts. No one expected the assignment to become memorable. By the summer of 1952, I had already served in the solar system for nearly 20 years. Roswell had been resolved. Most misplaced equipment had been recovered. Relations with local military authorities remained pleasantly non-existent. For a brief period, the division even believed we had finally achieved something exceedingly rare in our profession. Routine. Then Washington happened. According to human records, unidentified flying objects appeared repeatedly over the capital of the United States during 2 consecutive weekends in July. Radar operators tracked them. Fighter aircraft were scrambled. Pilots reported luminous objects performing maneuvers beyond the capabilities of contemporary aviation. Newspapers around the world described the incidents as one of the greatest UFO waves in history. Some believed it was a reconnaissance mission. Others suspected secret Soviet technology. A few proposed extraterrestrial visitors preparing humanity for first contact. The actual explanation generated considerably more paperwork. It also forced the Cultural Containment Division to rewrite 3 tourism regulations, establish orbital parking restrictions above politically sensitive capitals, and permanently prohibit academic group excursions during major cultural events without prior coordination between departments. Those policies remain in effect today. Officially, they are known as the Washington Amendments. Unofficially, we simply call them the baseball rules. Part 2. The event. The origin of the Washington incidents can be traced back to a document that was never intended to leave the archives of the Galactic Union's Department of Cultural Studies. Officially, it was titled Comparative Analysis of Collective Recreational Rituals Among Emerging Civilizations. It consisted of 612 pages, 3 appendices, and a statistical model so complicated that almost no one read it to completion. The conclusion, however, was unexpectedly concise. No single activity provides a better opportunity to observe 20th century North American social behavior than a Major League Baseball game attended during a summer weekend. The recommendation was intended exclusively for anthropologists assigned to pre-FTL civilizations. It was simply meant to guide future field studies. Unfortunately, someone in administrative publications selected the wrong distribution category. Instead of being archived as internal research reference, the report was published under recommended cultural experiences. It remained there for nearly 4 months before anyone noticed. By then, the consequences had already begun. Requests to visit Earth started arriving from every imaginable institution within the Union. Anthropologists wished to observe social interaction. Linguists wanted to study regional accents. Psychologists hoped to analyze collective emotional responses to competitive events. Economists were curious about the relationship between sporting events and consumer behavior. Historians argued that post-war America represented a unique cultural transition. Even several universities included the excursion in their graduate field programs. None of these requests appeared unusual on their own. Each application involved only one research vessel. Each followed the proper procedures. Each received the necessary authorizations. Each was approved by a different office. What no one realized was that every applicant had independently selected exactly the same destination. Washington, the city, was not chosen because of its political importance. It simply happened to host 2 Major League Baseball weekends, considered especially valuable for cultural observation. Attendance was expected to be high. Military ceremonies were scheduled before the games. The crowds would be representative. From an anthropological perspective, it was an excellent opportunity. From an air traffic perspective, it was a catastrophe waiting to happen. The first vessels arrived on Friday evening. Additional observers continued arriving throughout Saturday morning. Most were small scientific craft, equipped with passive observation instruments designed specifically for long-duration surveillance. Several carried graduate students. One belonged to the Central Museum of Sentient Civilizations. Another was transporting retired researchers participating in what the Union described as an educational heritage excursion. I remember checking the orbital traffic display shortly before local noon. At first, I assumed the navigation system was malfunctioning. The display showed dozens of authorized observation permits stacked over the same geographic coordinates. Every permit was perfectly valid. Every flight plan had been approved. Every vessel was exactly where it had been authorized to be. The system had simply never been designed to consider that so many independent approvals could converge on the same location. My immediate supervisor stared at the display for several seconds before quietly asking, "Is there some kind of conference?" There was not. Only baseball. To preserve the secrecy protocols established for pre-FTL worlds, every vessel operated with adaptive optical concealment. Contrary to popular imagination, however, cloaking systems are not magical. They are engineering. Engineering comes with limitations. When numerous observation craft occupy nearly identical positions, their concealment fields begin interacting with one another. Under normal circumstances, this is avoided simply by maintaining adequate separation. On that weekend, adequate separation became increasingly difficult. Every researcher wanted an unobstructed view of the stadium. Every pilot adjusted position by a few hundred meters. Then another adjusted in response. Then another. Within hours, what should have been a carefully dispersed observation network had become something resembling orbital rush hour traffic. Navigation computers continuously modified field intensity to prevent interference between neighboring vessels. To human radar operators, these adjustments produced intermittent returns. Objects appeared, disappeared, reappeared somewhere else, accelerated, stopped, changed direction. The operators were witnessing nothing more extraordinary than dozens of automatic collision avoidance systems attempting to remain polite. Naturally, the United States Air Force reached a different conclusion. Interceptor aircraft were launched. Ground controllers attempted to track the unknown objects. Radar stations compared observations. Inside our communications channel, the atmosphere remained remarkably calm. One research team requested permission to descend another 200 meters for better visibility. Permission was denied. Another complained that military aircraft were obstructing their recordings. A third politely asked whether local authorities always organized aerial demonstrations before sporting events. One cultural historian became convinced that the interceptor formation itself was part of the ceremonial opening of the game. His published paper, regrettably, remained in circulation for almost 80 years before being quietly corrected. The baseball game itself proceeded almost entirely unnoticed by the visitors. Not because it lacked interest. Quite the opposite. Most of them spent so much time observing the spectators that they paid surprisingly little attention to the players. Entire notebooks were filled with detailed descriptions of concession vendors. Family interactions, children collecting foul balls, spontaneous applause. and lengthy debates concerning whether spectators attended primarily for athletic competition or for communal participation. One sociologist dedicated 23 pages to the behavioral significance of eating peanuts while standing in line. His conclusions remain controversial. By the time the first weekend ended, reports from American radar stations had already reached international attention. Within the Cultural Containment Division, emergency meetings began almost immediately. Someone finally discovered the administrative error. All remaining travel permits were ordered suspended. It was, unfortunately, a perfectly reasonable decision. It simply arrived too late. According to Interdepartmental Regulation 18C, temporary scientific authorizations could not be revoked immediately. The cancellation first required validation by the Office of Permit Review. Permit Review forwarded the matter to legal harmonization. Because several vessels belonged to civilian universities rather than government institutions, legal harmonization requested clarification from cultural studies, arguing that the original recommendation had technically encouraged attendance. Cultural studies replied that the recommendation had been scientific rather than recreational. Administrative publications argued that the publication category had been selected in accordance with formatting guidelines. No department accepted responsibility. Meanwhile, the following weekend arrived exactly on schedule. So did the observers. Several had even brought colleagues who had been unable to secure authorization for the first excursion. One vessel included the researcher's family. Technically, they were listed as accompanying educational participants. Technically, that classification was entirely legitimate. When I reviewed the orbital traffic display for the second weekend, there were even more authorized craft than before. I turned toward my supervisor and asked the only question that still seemed worth asking. Who approved all of these? He examined the records in silence, then sighed. Apparently, everyone did. Part 3. Containment. Contrary to popular belief, the Cultural Containment Division has never specialized in making evidence disappear. That is far more difficult than most civilizations imagine. People remember what they have seen. Radar operators keep logs. Pilots write reports. Newspapers publish headlines. Governments ask questions. Entire populations become curious. Erasing all of that would require an efficiency no bureaucracy has ever possessed. Fortunately, we discovered long ago that erasure is unnecessary. Confusion is considerably more practical. Within hours of the second weekend, containment teams were dispatched throughout Washington. Not to silence witnesses, not to confiscate documents, not even to interfere with the military investigation. Our instructions were much simpler. Encourage every plausible explanation. If a radar technician suspected atmospheric conditions, no one argued. If an officer believed the objects belonged to an experimental aircraft program, that possibility was quietly allowed to circulate. If journalists preferred mysterious flying saucers, we found no reason to discourage their enthusiasm. By the end of the month, the incident had accumulated so many competing explanations that none could completely eliminate the others. That, from our perspective, constituted a successful operation. The official internal investigation, however, proved considerably less successful. It lasted almost 8 months. Representatives from 7 departments reviewed every authorization, every navigation record, every communication log, and every orbital traffic report generated during those 2 weekends. The final report contained one conclusion that has since become something of a legend within the division. No equipment malfunction was identified. No safety regulation was violated. No travel authorization was improperly approved. There was a brief pause before the final sentence. The incident resulted from the simultaneous and entirely correct application of existing administrative procedures. In other words, Everyone had done exactly what they were supposed to do. The disaster had emerged from perfect compliance. Committees find such conclusions deeply unsatisfying. Reality occasionally does. Several procedural reforms followed. Observation permits above politically significant capitals became subject to centralized coordination. Civilian research institutions were assigned mandatory traffic windows. Orbital parking limitations were introduced for all pre-FTL worlds. Most importantly, academic excursions to major cultural events could no longer be approved independently by separate departments. These regulations became collectively known as the Washington Amendments. Among field agents, however, they acquired a far simpler name: the baseball rules. They remain in force today. I have occasionally been asked whether I regret what happened during those weekends. After all, the incident became one of humanity's most famous UFO cases. Books were written, television documentaries were produced, governments conducted inquiries, generations of researchers debated the meaning of lights that appeared over the American capital during the summer of 1952. Some concluded they had witnessed an extraterrestrial reconnaissance mission. Others believed an invasion had nearly begun. A few suspected secret military technology that history had somehow forgotten. I have always found those theories strangely flattering. The truth was considerably less dramatic. No invasion had been planned. No strategic reconnaissance had been authorized. No government secrets were being collected. For 2 consecutive weekends, dozens of scholars, students, museum curators, retired professors, and a handful of enthusiastic tourists traveled across several sectors of the galaxy for the sole purpose of observing what one academic paper had described as the most representative ritual of 20th century American society. They spent far more time watching the spectators than the players. As for the game itself, I believe Washington won one of them. I never asked about the other. By that point, I had already completed enough paperwork to lose all interest in baseball. End of Archive 237.